Once upon a time, on a grey Wednesday morning in rural England, there was a man named Daniel Harper. It was the kind of morning that felt suspended between silence and motion. Daniel Harper had been on the road since 5 a.m., chasing a location that now seemed determined to stay hidden. At 36, he was a documentary filmmaker from London, used to uncertainty, used to long drives, but not used to being completely lost. Somewhere along the winding back roads of Wiltshire, his GPs had given up. Too many unnamed lanes, too many indistinguishable turns. Now his Land Rover sat stranded on the gravel shoulder, one tyre flat, the engine ticking quietly as it cooled. Around him stretched damp fields, tangled hedgerows, and the distant echoing calls of rooks perched high in an oak tree. The breakdown service had promised 45 minutes. Daniel stepped out, pulling his jacket tighter against the chill, and leaned against the car. That's when he noticed it, just beyond a low stone wall running along the roadside. A private sanctuary. And inside it, elephants. He blinked, unsure if the early hour was playing tricks on him. But no, there they were, 6 of them, massive, still, almost unreal against the soft English landscape. Their breath drifted into the cold air like smoke, slow and steady. A wooden sign near the gate read, Millfield Elephant Sanctuary Est. 1987. Curiosity pulled him closer. He climbed onto the stone wall and sat there watching. One elephant stood nearer than the others, a large bull with a pale scar across one tusk. There was something calm, almost ancient in his presence. His ears flicked lazily, his eyes half closed. Then Daniel noticed something that didn't make sense. A rope, a single rope, was tied loosely around the elephant's front leg. It wasn't thick or reinforced, just a simple hemp rope, no stronger than a garden hose. The other end was fixed to a wooden stake driven into the ground. That was it. No chains, no electric fence, nothing that could realistically restrain an animal of that size. Daniel stared. The elephant could have broken free without effort. One step, one pull, and the rope would snap like thread. There would be no struggle, no resistance worth noticing. But the elephant didn't move. He simply stood there, still, quiet, as though leaving had never crossed his mind. After a while, Daniel heard footsteps crunching on gravel. He turned to see an older man approaching, late 60s, wearing a tweed cap and Wellington boots. His pace was unhurried, his expression calm. "Flat tire?" the man asked. "That obvious?" Daniel replied. "You're the 4th this year on that bend," the man said, glancing at the road. Then he nodded toward the elephant. "His name is Thomas. He's incredible," Daniel said. Then, unable to hold back, he added, "Why doesn't he just walk away?" That rope wouldn't stop him for a second. The man introduced himself as George, the sanctuary's founder. He rested his arms on the wall and looked at Thomas for a long moment before speaking. "How much time do you have?" 45 minutes, Daniel said. George nodded. Thomas came here when he was 2 years old, confiscated from a travelling show. He was small then, weak, frightened, barely able to trust anything. We tied him with that same kind of rope. Back then it was enough. He paused, his gaze fixed on the elephant, but he tried to break it. Every day. He pulled and strained until he had nothing left. Morning after morning, night after night. And every time the rope held. Daniel listened quietly. Eventually George continued. Something changed. Not in the rope, in him. He stopped trying, not because he couldn't grow stronger, but because he had learned that trying didn't work. The words settled heavily between them. Now George said, "He's one of the strongest animals here. That rope means nothing anymore." But he doesn't know that. Or maybe he no longer questions it. Daniel looked back at Thomas, the stillness, the quiet acceptance. "Did you ever try removing it?" he asked. George nodded slowly. "Once." A volunteer untied him, thinking it was the right thing to do. I came in that morning and found him standing exactly where he always stands. No rope, no stake, nothing holding him. What did he do? Nothing, George said. He moved a little, ate, came back, stood there again. It was as if the rope was still there, just invisible. Daniel felt a strange weight in his chest. We put the rope back, George added softly. It felt honest, somehow. He straightened, preparing to leave, then paused. The strangest prison, he said, is the one where the door has been open for years and the prisoner has stopped looking at it. And with that, he walked away. The breakdown service arrived sooner than expected. The tire was changed. The day moved on. Daniel found the sanctuary he had been commissioned to film, captured everything he needed, and returned to London. But something stayed with him. Not the footage, not the assignment. Thomas. Weeks passed, and the image refused to leave his mind. That enormous animal, held not by strength, but by memory. A boundary that no longer existed, except in his own belief. And slowly, Daniel began to turn the question inward. He thought about the production company he had been planning for 6 years. Always postponed, always next year. He thought about the screenplay sitting unfinished on his laptop. 80 pages written and then abandoned because the first draft wasn't good enough. He thought about a teacher 15 years ago who had told him he wasn't talented enough, and how, without realizing it, he had believed it. He had adjusted his life around that moment, around that rope. He hadn't tested it since. That was the realization that unsettled him the most. Because the rope hadn't been real for years. He had simply never gone back to check. And maybe that's the question this story leaves behind. What rope are you still standing next to? What invisible boundary are you still respecting, not because it's real today, but because it once was? Because you are not the same person you were back then. You are not as small, not as inexperienced, not as fragile as you were when you first failed. You have grown, whether you noticed it or not. But growth means nothing if you never test it. The rope will not break on its own. The boundary will not disappear just because time has passed. You have to go back. You have to reach for it again. Not with certainty, not with guarantees, just with the willingness to find out. Because maybe the worst that happens is exactly what happened before. You fail again. But maybe the rope snaps, and in that moment, everything changes. You realize that the thing holding you back was never as strong as you thought, that the wall was never really there, that you have been free for much longer than you knew. Thomas is still standing in that paddock, still strong, still capable, still waiting, without knowing he's waiting. Don't be Thomas. Go back. Test the rope.